Ah, the history of neuroscience. What a wonderful topic. Not what we're going to discuss, but a wonderful topic. You know, funny thing about the history of neuroscience that I'll note is that they didn't know that the brain did anything. Why would they think the brain did anything? Like, who's someone? I think it might have been Aristotle, who thought that the brain was like a ventilation system, because there's no reason to think that the brain had any it was related to our ability to think or controlled our ability to think. Now let's fast forward to nowadays. What is our evidence that the brain controls sort of what we think, that it's the center of how we think, of what we think? Well, we detect activity in the brain when we think. Isn't that like, I mean, that's a correlation, of course. When we think, activity responds in the brain. If I shove a pipe through my brain, I'll lose certain abilities, or I'll think a little differently, lose certain thought processes. But, like, so that is that. But if I put a pipe through my arm, I obviously can't move my arm then because the nerve is destroyed. Um, but it gets me thinking, like, I mean, sure, it, like, correlates with that, but what if something controls the brain, and the brain then does whatever it is, and then the arm does whatever it does? That's sort of the mind-body problem, I believe it's referred to. Probably somewhere in here. I didn't really read this, but I will, potentially. This is brain in hieroglyphics. But it gets me thinking. I only think this way because of, other times where two things could correlate, but they didn't, like, one thing didn't actually cause the other. There was no causation, in a way. And it gets me thinking, there are other times where I only think to think in different ways because there were other experiences. Like, oh, I learned that trees and squirrels, I realize, I don't know, trees and tape. I found a relationship between those two things. Or what's something that exists? Like trees and wind, I guess. Well, it's not that crazy. Well, let's say trees and tape. Okay, I found a correlation. I found some way trees and tape were related. So then later I'm like, oh, you know what? Maybe plants and clouds. Maybe there's some relationships there. Only because of that past experience would I have thought to find another relationship. What can allow us to come up with truly creative thought processes? Maybe an element of randomness that, like, would get us an idea that's somehow crazy different. But even then, like, we'd be making like an interesting thing when I said all of this. Like, a lot of this I'd actually memorized. These are various ideas I'd memorized, I guess, that I tied together. But I wasn't actually speaking in a reasonable way. Like, I wasn't stringing together the ideas mentally, and I was like, oh, this relates to that relates to that. I wasn't really seeing the reasoning behind some of the things I was saying. These are just things I know I thought of in the past, which is also quite interesting. I mean, it's like, well, for multiple reasons. I mean, I never really think I can be wrong, like, truly. Like, I mean, I think I can be wrong, but it's very surprising, you know, for something to happen where you just, like, you think clearly. Like, if I'm thinking clearly and then I end up being wrong, that fundamentally somehow, like, that's just crazy when that happens. I don't know how often that happens. I want to say not often at all, but could be often. Probably pretty often. So there's that as well. So there we have it. WikiWand is awesome, kind of. I mean, it's kind of like Wikipedia. So I'm just gonna wish you all a happy good night. That's all. Okay.